I'm Bill Weir in Greenland, and this is CNN.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Michael Holmes, coming to you live from the CNN Center. Ukraine's president says Russian atrocities in a suburb of Kyiv are war crimes and will be recognized by the world as, quote, genocide. Volodymyr Zelensky visiting the town of Bucha on today, where horrific scenes have emerged after Russian forces were pushed out. We do warn you, the next images are very disturbing, hard to watch, but important to show the world. Bodies found in the streets, some with their hands tied behind their backs, others with signs of torture, dozens buried in a mass grave. Mr. Zelensky says he wants, quote, every mother of every Russian soldier to see pictures of the dead. He asks, quote, what did they do? Why were ordinary civilians in an ordinary peaceful city killed? And he pointed out that one victim was killed while simply riding his bicycle.
It is very important to us that the press is here, the journalists are here, and that is the main thing. We want you to show the world what happened here, what the Russian military did, what the Russian Federation did in peaceful Ukraine. It was important for you to see that these were civilians.
CNN's Fred Pleitgen visited Bucha to see these atrocities firsthand, and another warning for you. His report contains very disturbing graphic images.
As Russian forces retreat from the area north of Kyiv, in their wake, scenes of utter destruction. Whole blocks of houses flattened, Ukrainian authorities saying they believe dead bodies are still lying underneath. But here, the dead also lay in the open. Ukrainian National Police showed us this mass grave in Bucha, saying they believed up to 150 civilians might be buried here, but no one knows the exact number. People killed while the Russian army occupied this town. This is what it looks like when the hope is crushed. Vladimir has been searching for his younger brother, Dmitry. Now he's convinced Dmitry lies here, even though he can't be 100% sure. The neighbor accompanying him with strong words for the Russians. Why do you hate us so much, she asks. Since the 1930s, you've been abusing Ukraine. You just want to destroy us. You want us gone. But we will be. Everything will be okay. I believe it. Video from Bucha shows bodies in the streets after Russian forces left the area. Some images even show bodies with hands tied behind their backs. The Russian Defense Ministry denies killing civilians and claims images of dead civilians are, quote, fake. But we met a family just returning to their house in Borodyanka, which they say was occupied by Russian soldiers. They show us the body of a dead man in civilian clothes they had found in the backyard. His hands and feet tied with severe bruises and a shell casing still laying nearby. Russia's military appears to have suffered heavy losses before being driven out of the area around Kyiv. This column of armored vehicles in Bucha completely destroyed. The way the Ukrainians tell us is that the Russians were trying to go towards Kyiv and they were then intercepted by Ukrainian drones, artillery, and also the Javelin anti-tank weapons. It's not clear how many Russians were killed here, but they say many were, and others fled the scene. A national police officer says the Russian troops were simply too arrogant. They thought they could drive on the streets and just go through, he says, that they would be greeted as though it's all right. Maybe they think it is normal to drive around looting, to destroy buildings and to mock people, but our people didn't allow it. And now it appears all the Russians have withdrawn from here. Ukraine says it is now in full control of the entire region around Kyiv. But it is only now that the full extent of the civilian suffering is truly coming to light.
Fred Pleitgen reporting there. Now, the mayor of Bucha says Russian forces killed, quote, indiscriminately. He told CNN that children are among the dead, as well as many elderly residents.
The impression that the Russian occupiers have got the green light from Putin and Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, to have a safari in Ukraine, and they weren't able to take Kyiv, so they vented their frustration on Bucha and the surrounding areas. and we will never forgive the Russian people, not personally, not individually, but on the whole. We will not forgive the Russian people for the atrocities that happened here.
Now, the killings in Bucha have triggered international outrage, as you might imagine, and calls for tougher action against Russia. The European Union says it is urgently discussing a new round of sanctions. French President Emmanuel Macron said he wants to see a total block on Russian exports of coal and oil to the EU, and he wants that to happen this week. The British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss met in Poland today with Ukraine's Foreign Minister, backing his call for tougher sanctions. Dmytro Kuleba said he invites anyone who hesitates to impose harsher penalties to come visit Bucha and stand before the mass grave.
Half measures are not enough anymore. I demand from our partners, on behalf of the victims of Bucha and the people of Ukraine, to take the most severe sanctions against Russia this week. This is not the request of Ukraine's foreign minister. This is the plea of the victims of rape, torture, and killings.
The idea that we should wait for something else bad to happen is just completely wrong. The worst has already happened. We have already seen appalling atrocities committed in Ukraine with complete impunity. And that is why we want to go to the maximum level of sanctions.
Let's talk about all of this with Nick Robertson, who joins me now live from Brussels. Good to see you, my friend. Now, Germany's finance minister said today, quote, "We must end all economic relations with Russia as soon as possible." I mean, how much further might Europe go in terms of sanctions in light of what we are seeing in Bucha and elsewhere, for that matter?
Yeah, I think the German finance minister gave a clue to the limits for Germany, at least, because he said if we were to stop taking gas from Germany, he said that would put Germany into a recession. We heard a similar thing from a senior German banker earlier in the day. There is certainly a degree of unanimity that more action must be taken. And the question is what action? And a lot of it at the moment does focus on Russia's energy exports. And the simple reason for that is Russia gets a huge amount of money from European Union nations, estimated at the moment to be in excess of $20 billion that the European Union countries have given to Russia for Russia's energy exports since Russia invaded Ukraine. So it's a huge amount of money. The problem is, take a country like Lithuania, that over the weekend the Prime Minister said we are the first European Union nation to completely stop importing Russian gas. They have access to other sources of gas. Take Latvia, another Baltic nation just next door, equally concerned about Russia's actions in Ukraine and what it may mean for the Baltic states, saying, well, in essence, we need to continue to buy gas from Russia because they don't have other alternatives. So while there's agreement, more must be done. It's finding that sort of sweet spot, if you will. Where there is also agreement here at the European Union is who is responsible, because they've been hearing a lot today from Russia saying, actually, these videos are doctored and it's fake and this isn't true. This is what the European Union foreign policy spokesman said about that.
These areas about which we talk have been under the occupation, under the control of the aggressor, of the Russian troops, or they've been bombed out by the aggressor, the Russian troops. So, of course, there is no one else who could have committed these atrocities.
So it doesn't seem as if the European Union is going to be deflected by what Moscow is trying to do here to change the narrative and confuse and muddy the waters, but quite where they're going to agree on the next sanctions, on what those sanctions will be precisely, just isn't clear at the moment, Michael. It's certainly the sense that something must be done, it's really there. But as we've seen before, not everyone aligns fully in the EU. They have different positions, different needs.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, Hungary is in the EU, and its leader, Viktor Orban, was just re-elected. He takes a very hard line and in his support, in many ways, for Vladimir Putin. How does that complicate the European position when it comes to unity? They have unity, but there's devil in the detail.
There is. Excuse me. There is, certainly, and I think Viktor Orban 2 weeks ago, before he went into election at the weekend, might have been mindful slightly on his positioning on all of this, because the opposition in Hungary was using the war in Russia as part of that war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine, as sort of part of their campaign against Orban. Now, Orban's won that election, so he doesn't sort of have political vulnerability at home. And he said over the weekend, after coming in ahead in the polling in Hungary over the weekend, he said that actually he sees Zelensky as the opposition. And, Prime Minister Orban was one of the last European Union leaders to visit President Putin before the war began. And Putin made very clear at that stage that he sees energy supplies to Europe as a political tool. And he reminded Orban, in public, full view of the cameras, you get gas from us, Russia, at a discounted rate. You're getting it over a long period at a discounted rate. That, shows Putin's mindset on how he'll use energy supplies to Europe, but it also shows how much Orban is in hock, if you will, to Putin over this. And saying that he'd used Zelensky as opposition is a signal to other leaders in the European Union that getting Orban's support for whatever they decide is not a given, and they will have to work at it.
Yeah. Before we let you go, I wanted to play some sound from a Ukrainian MP, which seems relevant to all of this. Let's have a listen.
In each gallon of Russian oil, there is Ukrainian blood. In each cubic meter of Russian gas, there is Ukrainian blood. Is it normal for civilized countries to buy blood of innocent people and to pay for this?
It really does point to, the emotional pressure on Europe from the reality of what is happening on the ground and Europe's own sort of realities that they face when they want to turn the lights on.
Yeah, that reality, the figure we were talking about, just to state it again, because it's such a substantial amount, this blood money that he's essentially talking about, already more than $20 billion from the EU to Russia. And we heard from Liz Truss, of course, the UK not in the EU anymore, talking about, well, the UK trying to find its own timeline to rid itself of the need for Russian gas, Russian coal, Russian oil. European nations, the UK and others, have become used to over the years as Russia as a key energy supplier. And the warnings have been there all along that that's potentially leaves them politically vulnerable. And now they're finding that. They're certainly voicing strong support for Ukraine, but there's a limit to how far they can go. And this is going to be something they'll have to balance with their publics, particularly when public's perception is that Russia in this is guilty of these war crimes, or alleged war crimes, if you will. That's a lot of public pressure on politicians to do something and act, and there's a limit to how far they can go.
Yeah, always a great summary. Nick Robertson, appreciate it. There in Brussels, good to see you. Well, as Ukrainian forces fight to liberate areas around the capital, many, including Ukraine's foreign minister, fear the horrors we're seeing in Bucha are just the beginning. Joining me now via Skype from Kyiv is Timothy Milonovov. He is an advisor to President Zelensky and a former Minister of Economic Development and Trade in Ukraine. So we have seen these horrific scenes in Bucha, but you've been saying you expect even worse to emerge in other places.
Yes, we have eyewitness accounts from a different area through teachers that we know personally who taught pupils, and then now some of them are young ladies, others are adults, in northeast of Kyiv. Bucha is in northwest. It's on a different bank of Dnieper River. And there is a different direction, Brovary, which also has been recently liberated. The network of villages is slightly different there. It's more, they are remote and smaller, several houses. So here's an example from Velika Dimerka, a person, a young boy, had a Molotov cocktail found in his house. So Russians took this cocktail, poured over his head, and burned him alive. Another person from a different village reports a number of young females raped and executed. And yet another village, you know, it's difficult to say. Yeah, I know some of these people, so please, I'm sorry.
Horrific. No, I understand. Carry on.
Another village, and we lost control with that village. People reported, and again, this all has to be documented. That is not just my words. This is all at this point alleged and reported. But you know, I know some of these people, and so they were calling and that Russian troops took all food away and prohibited people from exiting houses and village to find food, and everyone who tried was shot.
That's
and we lost the contact with that village.
These are horrific stories,
village.
and as you say, they need to be documented. They need to be used as evidence in whatever war crimes tribunals are set up. I wanted your reaction, though, because Russia says it's fake news, that the scenes in Bucha essentially were staged or faked. I mean, what do you and the president you advise say to that?
Well, you know, Russia is lying, and everyone has seen it. And these are the areas which were under their control. And, you know, everyone, you know, that's been documented on social networks by their soldiers, that they control this. It's been geotagged. It's been, you know, there's no single fact that shows that Ukrainian troops or anyone was in those villages. Ukrainian troops, of course, resisted and disrupted supply lines, but these specific remote areas, you know, my wife's mother is from that village, from one of the villages, and she was receiving calls daily, so I know it for a fact that Russian troops were there. And, you know, she works in a hospital, and a nurse from that hospital was executed, shot by Russians, and they shot her nephew, a young boy, a grandkid, you know, like grandson. And then they shot her. And, you know, my wife's mother is just devastated. You know, what can I say to that? I mean, it's just, you know, it's a disease. It's a Russian disease. I don't know. It's wrong. It's not humanity anymore. That's what I say to it.
How might what's unfolding here, this evidence that you're talking about, and which, you know, our teams have seen with their own eyes, how might that impact talks or the possibility of talks with Russia? I mean, Mr. Zelensky says Bucha makes it difficult to negotiate with Russia. Russia has said pretty much the same thing. How does that complicate the chance of talks?
I think we will negotiate for peace. We are just worried that Russia does not do that in good faith, and it just uses this tactic to delay, to regroup, and to come up with counterattack. And we have seen that done since 2014 in Minsk I and Minsk II talks, where, you know, I've been in some of these groups, also I have not been on negotiation teams when I was in the government and later when I was advising. You know, the way they do it, just before the negotiations, they step up pressure, military pressure. That's their understanding, or that's their logic of pressuring people. So they always negotiate from the position of power. They try to, you know, if you remember Minsk I and Minsk II, how they worked, they were negotiated after there were decisive losses for Ukrainian military in Debaltsevo and Ilovaisk. Yeah. And I think what has to happen in Ukraine, at least that's what, you know, that's what Russia is planning on. And they were trying to do it with Kyiv. That didn't work. Now they're trying to do it with Mariupol and the east of Ukraine, and that's not working. Yeah. But really inflict a massive losses on Ukrainian side that Ukraine surrenders. So they negotiate from the position of power. But I think that's not going to be the case this time. My heart goes out to those people who will not see the day. when it's over.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, Ukrainians are not giving in at all. That as a tactic is not working, but it's costing a lot of lives. I mean, you and I last spoke when I was in Lviv, and we talked about economic damage being done to your country. When it comes to pressuring Russia, sanctions and so on, sanctions, of course, take time to work. What can be done in an economic sense that would have an immediate impact?
Two types of sanctions. One is that everyone is talking about. They're sort of conventional sanctions because they work across the economy. But, even today, Russia earns, I don't know, $300 million a day on oil and gas. And essentially, it continues to be profitable. So it can run, forever. So unless there is gas and oil embargo, nothing is going to really work in Russia as a sanction. And I know it's really costly for the Western politicians, but Ukraine has gone through this. We also were subsidized. And we also, for decades, were getting, good deals in gas from Russia. See where it got us? And I think, that's a false hope to believe that somehow you can manage with Russia and find the middle ground, with the economy. You just have to cut off. And sooner you do it, better it is. And also it's ethically and morally proper. And then there is high precision sanctions. Those can work faster. This is sanctions on critical imports, which are required for Russia to be able to operate military equipment, modernize it or repair it. So example is as recent as several weeks ago, Bosch was supplying heating equipment, I think, to the tanks. And some of French companies were supplying high precision equipment. And, the amount of money on those contracts they're really small, like, 100 million euros over a year or two. So Russia would be able to afford it, but it's that critical equipment that allows them to use high precision weapons to bomb Ukrainian cities. And I think that has to stop.
Timothy Milovanov, an advisor to President Zelensky, also an economist in his own right. Good to speak to you again, and hope you're doing well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Russian shells have reduced parts of Ukraine's second largest city to rubble. We'll show you how civilians in Kharkiv are pushing through and trying to give their children a taste of normal life. We'll be right back.
Dhaka is one of the world's most densely populated cities. 5 years ago, motorbikes were not a very popular way to dodge traffic here. But Pathau, one of the country's most successful startups, has helped change that.
We created an entire category of transportation. Motorcycle ride-sharing was not popular in Bangladesh, but we made that popular.
Pathau received initial funding from Asian tech giant Gojek in 2018. And became the first company in Bangladesh to launch motorcycle rideshares.
At that point, we only had 10 bikes. We operated mostly via a Facebook group.
The app has over 8 million users and 300,000 drivers. From courier services to food delivery, Pathau now has over 10 different features.
Pathau is no longer just a ride-sharing company. It is a super app.
Welcome back. Human Rights Watch has accused Russian forces of committing war crimes against civilians in Kharkiv. Russian troops have bombarded the city indiscriminately. The regional military governor says just yesterday Russians fired on a city district and killed civilians. Christiane Amanpour takes us there, a warning some of the images you will see are graphic.
Here in Kharkiv, former Ukrainian capital, second biggest city, and one of the most important cultural sites, the great 19th century poet Taras Shevchenko is hunkering down for the rest of this war. Workers cover him in sandbags against the kind of destruction that's pounded this city's center since the start. The most spectacular strike was this one a month ago. A Russian missile slams low and hard straight into the corner of the regional administration building.
The missile struck right here, and the idea of hitting a building like this is to deny the legitimacy of the state. But the terror against civilians continues, playground by playground, mall by mall, park bench by park bench.
Which is what we find in this residential neighborhood. People were sitting outside chatting on a Sunday afternoon. Kids were playing. We find the telltale pattern of a mortar that landed right here. Authorities say 7 people were killed in this neighborhood, many more were injured. Kharkiv sits 40 miles from the Russian border. It is the last major city before Donbass, where Russia is directing its war effort to the east. Just last week, the nearby village of Mala Rohan was liberated from the Russians. This civilian says he was captured and held.
Меня взяли в плен, то есть повели к офицеру на допрос, то есть допрос, офицер там сказал, что ты укроп, ты диверсант, то есть я говорю, я гражданский, вот покажите меня документы, прописка, то есть я здесь живу, я приехал просто попросить, ребята, не стреляйте по домам.
When dusk falls, children are outside playing and getting the last bit of fresh air before descending underground into one of the capital's many subway stations. After 40 days of war, they have turned their temporary homes into a neighborhood. Some have even decorated with fresh flowers. Zina says she's been living down here since the beginning.
Oh, this is my house. Yeah. This used to be my house. Now we cannot live here, obviously, because it has been bombed 3 times in a row.
But this is a safe space for you.
Yes, absolutely.
And for the kids.
Yes, absolutely.
Kids do what kids do, homework and handicrafts. Even this is organized. Marina works for an organization that plans ways to keep the children busy, entertained, and their minds off the trauma.
Here we equipped the playing grounds, the space for kids, where they can play with toys, with constructors, made puzzles, and do the things they did in their usual life before the war.
But the trauma is never far away, as we found in this underground station, where civil defense are teaching kids how to protect themselves, how to recognize weapons and ordnance, and to remember never to touch. The adults are shown how to protect themselves in case of a chemical weapons attack. Even this maternity hospital was damaged in a mortar strike. Now the basement has been turned into a shelter and delivery room, if necessary. Birth. Life continues. We met Alina 30 minutes after she had delivered baby Yaroslava.
Well, she is well too. My first daughter.
Your first daughter?
Yeah.
Your first child?
Yeah.
As we're leaving, she tells us, I love my country, I love my daughter, my family, my husband. And in the delirium of new motherhood, she says, everything will be great for us.
A powerful report there from Christiane, and she does join me now live from Kharkiv. I know communications have been difficult. It's great to see you, my friend. You needless to say, have covered wars for decades. What is it like being in Kharkiv? Do you have any sort of measure of comparison? How bad is it?
Well, first and foremost, the entire city is in total lockdown and blackout as of 8 p.m. every night. So that's why we're here, curtains against any light being seen from the outside, in a hotel room, unable to be outside with lights to do this kind of report with you. However, it is what it is, and it shows what's happening in Kharkiv, the second largest city, which today the Minister of Defense, his spokesman said, this is the Ukrainian minister said, they're very concerned that a Russian regroup is going to, go towards the east where Kharkiv kind of is, and they might even try to capture Kharkiv. That was from the Ministry of Defense. So people here are really, really afraid. We're only 40 kilometers from the Russian border, and it's a city of some 1.5 million people, Michael. About a third or more have fled, and it's a ghost town during the day. I mean, literally, most of everything is boarded up. There's no business flourishing, no restaurants, cafes. There are gas stations and some food stores, but there are lines outside, pharmacies and the rest. And we've been hearing intermittent, regular artillery duels. We can hear it. And we went this morning to see the impact of a mortar strike, which happened yesterday, not far from where we are. 7 people were killed on a Sunday afternoon. 34 people were injured. And this is the pace of events here in Kharkiv. And it's scary for people, very, very scary, particularly, Michael, after what they saw coming out of Kyiv. And they really don't want this place captured and to, have a fate worse than what happened around those outskirts of the capital.
Yeah, horrific scenes all around the country, and signs of resilience continue as well. And it's great to have you there to bear witness. Christian Amanpour, thanks so much there in Kharkiv. All right, still to come tonight, Ukraine's foreign minister says Russia's crimes in Bucha are just the tip of the iceberg. We'll uncover more of the horrors coming up.
Sumagat sa kabisa, bawat minutong lumilipas. Hinahanap-hanap kita, hanap-hanapin ka. Sabik sa'yo.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN.
I'm Jenny Wassenaar, Chief Sustainability Officer at 3VM Packaging. Sustainability is an imperative for any business. If you look at the footprint of your organization, you have to make sure that by 2050 latest, you're at zero emissions. This is important for the Earth, it's important for future generations, but it's also important for your employees. So I'm expecting that businesses that do not focus on sustainability, that they will not be around for a very long time. Of course, this looks a bit like a threat, but it's actually not. It's a great opportunity for companies to embrace sustainability, take sustainability in your DNA, and make a future career and success for your business out of sustainability.
I'm Salma Abdulaziz at the Poland-Ukraine border, and this is CNN.
Survivors in Bucha in Ukraine are now telling their stories of atrocities at the hands of Russian forces, horrifying stories of rape, of torture and mass killings. ITN's Dan Rivers visited Bucha to see the result of Russia's violent occupation for himself. A warning, as we so often do these days, many of the images in his report are graphic and disturbing.
At the gateway to Bucha and Hostomel, there are the mangled remains of Russian vehicles and the blown bridge which marks the extent of their advance. And nearby the burnt bodies of soldiers killed here by a Ukrainian counter-offensive. Gruesome sentinels to a battlefield in which dated Russian machinery was pitted against the latest Western-supplied anti-tank weapons. And this was the result, a rewriting of the orthodoxy about Russia's perceived military strength. Some of the Russians who sought to occupy this commuter town near Kyiv will probably never leave. Thanks to one man's war, the remains may never be repatriated or possibly even identified.
This is the most potent symbol of the Russian defeat here in Bucha, a street choked with the charred remains of their tanks and armoured vehicles. Now they've gone, we're beginning to get a fuller picture of the terrible toll inflicted on the civilian population here.
War, in all its grotesque brutality, has turned these streets into a hell from which there is no triumph. Massacres of Ukrainian men have been uncovered by the army here. The war crimes committed here mark a bleak new low in this conflict, described by Ukraine as the most outrageous atrocity of the 21st century. There isn't just one site where massacres occurred. The true picture here is only just emerging. This man in Hostomel tells me about the rape and dismemberment of a young woman at the hands of two Chechen soldiers. He says they just slaughtered her like a lamb, but adds he took his revenge with other local men, killing them both. For the civilians like Maxim Skripnik caught between the two sides, there was little to do but pray for deliverance.
Describe what it was like, the bombardment. I mean, describe how it felt to you.
It was terrible. It was completely terrible. Near my car was exploded 3 mines.
Some of the dead were buried by their neighbours close to the shattered remains of their homes. This is where Ina lies, hit by a shell, her grave adorned with food and drink her relatives would have traditionally shared at her funeral, but her son has been unable to reach the town to grieve for his mother. But many more were hastily interred without headstones or even identification. Here it's believed 280 people were buried in mass graves, one row for Ukrainians, one for Russians.
This is horrible. We survived this. They were shelling us. I cannot find words to describe what we lived through.
This family appear to have escaped unscathed after days in a bunker, until you know Dima's father was detained by the Russians and never seen again. As he swings, he says, if the bad men come back, I'll stamp on them. There seems little chance now of the Russians fighting their way back into these towns, but the legacy of their brief reign of terror will never be forgotten.
ITN's Dan Rivers there. Now, along the coast west of Mykolaiv, the city of Odessa has once again come under fire. A Ukrainian official confirming several missiles hit one of the districts overnight. This attack following a strike on a fuel depot in Odessa on Sunday, which left residents shaken. CNN's Ed Lavandera is there.
The missiles exploded in a startling, violent barrage. About 6 strikes lit up the sky. Russian military officials say the attack on Odessa was launched from the sea and land using high-precision missiles. The massive plumes of black swirling smoke covered much of the city of 1 million people. The strikes landed in a largely industrial area, destroying an oil refinery and fuel storage facilities. Multiple airstrikes hit the port city of Odessa here in southern Ukraine just before sunrise Sunday morning. There were no air raid sirens that went off before the blasts, and the explosions could be felt and seen from miles away. Ukrainian officials say there were no injuries, but Tatiana Harasim says the explosions threw her from the chair she was sleeping in, and window glass shattered all over her. Tatiana volunteers in this building late into the night, cooking meals for Ukrainian soldiers. In recent days, she says reconnaissance drones were flying over the fuel storage facility. 2 other residents told us they saw the drones as well.
The drones were flying around and I knew they were up to something and could bomb the depot. And we've been thinking where we could hide in case something happens.
A small pocket of apartment buildings and homes sit just across the street from the bombing site. Families stood outside their homes under the clouds of dark smoke, watching flames shoot up into the air. The explosions shattered windows and any remaining sense of security these residents had left.
Of course I'm scared. And now they're hitting everywhere. They're doing it in all cities. We know it. We see it.
The attack on Odessa follows a similar pattern Russian forces have carried out for weeks, hitting fuel storage facilities across the country it claims are supplying their Ukrainian military. But if the Odessa strike is a precise attack, Ukrainian officials say the strikes hours later in the neighboring city of Mykolaiv have no rhyme or reason and are designed to harass and panic civilians. Despite being this close to the bombing and with tears in her eyes, Tatiana Harasim says she refuses to leave Ukraine. She tells me these bastards won't get away with it. Ed Lavandera, CNN, Odessa, Ukraine.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been re-elected in a landslide. He's now serving his 4th consecutive term. That means he'll be in power for another 4 years, likely spelling more headaches with the EU.
We have scored a victory so big that it can be seen even from the moon, but definitely from Brussels.
Orban's relationship with Moscow is creating some massive challenges within the EU, which has started to withhold funds for Hungary over human rights issues. Now, he is, to some extent, the closest friend the Russian president has within the European Union and NATO, and Vladimir Putin was quick to congratulate him on his re-election. But the Hungarian Prime Minister went one step further during his victory speech, calling Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky an opponent.
Now, we had to battle the biggest forces, the left wing at home, the international left wing, the Brussels bureaucrats, all the organizations of the Soros empire, the international mainstream media, and finally, the Ukrainian president as well. We never had so many opponents.
Still to come here on the program, saving the Earth. Has time run out? What scientists from around the world have to say in an alarming new report. We'll be right back.
Making small changes to what you eat can help make big improvements to your life. So here are 3 healthy eating habits that can help you cut the bad by adding the good to your routine. To help cut the salt, look to add herbs and spices to get that flavor you crave. And research suggests that certain spices like cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg contain nutrients that can help sharpen your memory and reduce stress. Try avoiding inflammatory foods. Those are junk foods like French fries, pastries, sodas, and red meat. Go for more anti-inflammatory foods like tomatoes and leafy greens. Remember, try to always have a glass of water with you to help quench your thirst. It can help you avoid sugary drinks and help you stay hydrated.
technology increases sort of the way child sex offenders communicate. My name is Guillermo Galarza. I am the Director of Global Partnerships and Trainees at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Right now, sex offenders can't travel because of the travel restrictions. So they're now using third-party merchants and cryptocurrencies to have other children in other parts of the world get abused, and in turn they pay them with these digital currencies. In 2019, there were close to 17 million reports of online child sexual exploitation. In 2020, that number went up to 21 million. There's been a significant increase in reporting of online child sexual exploitation. And why? Because children are more than ever, they're spending time at home. They're spending time on their mobile devices. They're going to school virtually. At ReElects, we want to make sure that law enforcement and all the multidisciplinary stakeholders are equipped with the technology, the tools, and the know-how so they can protect children online.
Now, a new report from the United Nations Panel on Climate Change says fossil fuels and a lack of political will are the two greatest environmental evils. It also says we do have the tools to fix the damage that's been done to our planet, but warns of what will happen if changes aren't made immediately. The UN Secretary-General says the time to act is now or never.
This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a litany of broken climate promises. It is a file of shame, cataloguing the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster.
Now, one stark fact from the report, global carbon emissions are now 54% higher than they were in just 1990. Have a think about that. The president of Pakistan calling for the formation of a caretaker government, meanwhile, while the country's Supreme Court decides the fate of its prime minister. The court's proceedings are on hold until tomorrow over whether it was unconstitutional for Prime Minister Imran Khan to dissolve parliament and announce early elections. His action came after a parliament official blocked a vote that could have removed Khan from power. Sri Lanka is also in a state of political chaos as the country struggles with a failing economy. Streets filled with protesters, and the president has declared a state of emergency. 26 cabinet members resigned during the weekend, and the government is being run by 4 ministers the president swore in earlier today. Shifting gears to social media, after criticising Twitter by saying the platform doesn't allow for free speech, the business mogul Elon Musk has now become the largest individual shareholder in the company. He purchased a little more than 9% of Twitter stock. The CEO of Tesla has 80 million Twitter followers. Still to come on the program tonight, a story of resilience for you. How this woman was forced to flee her home twice in a lifetime, first from the Nazis and again from Putin's invasion. We'll be right back.
There were 3 strikes that hit this facility. This is as close as you're going to get.
Just look at the utter destruction caused by this massive explosion.
Imagine the good fortune of the truck driver. He managed to survive.
More than a month into the war here in Ukraine, and the refugee crisis continues.
It is not even to being a ceasefire.
In Kiev, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Lviv, this is CNN.
The Omega Seamaster is the longest running product line still produced by Omega. The Omega Seamaster was first introduced in 1948 and was loosely based upon designs that were made for the British Royal Navy towards the end of World War II. What's interesting is most Omega Seamasters will have a seahorse adorned case back. So in the back of the case of the watch, you'll see a seahorse. And this actually pays tribute to Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. The seahorse logo was actually conceived by the engraver Jean-Pierre Burrell, who also has a bit of history with the sea and also from an artistic perspective. And he was actually an image of Neptune driving a chariot pulled by seahorses, which is why the seahorses are, again, depicted wearing bridles and on the back of Omega's Seamaster based watches.
Imagine fleeing the terror of the Nazis as a baby just to be pushed out of your home once again, this time by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That's what happened to an 82-year-old Holocaust survivor, Margarita Zatucha from Kharkiv. She is now in Poland after escaping the shells raining down on her beloved city. Salma Abdulaziz with her story.
I'm the director of the Jewish Community Center.
This is the moment Margarita Zatushna says she finally felt safe, welcomed by her Jewish community in Krakow.
I am presented with so good flowers, and it smells very well.
We sat down to hear the story from twice a survivor.
I was born in 1940. And when the war with Germany began, I was only 1.5 years.
In 1941, her family fled their home in Kharkiv, where Nazis murdered an estimated 16,000 Jews. She later returned, grew up and grew old in peacetime. That is, until Russian troops invaded, bombing and besieging Kharkiv. There was no water or power. We couldn't buy food. It was impossible to live, she says. There was explosion after explosion, a real war. Not even a monument that honors the city's Holocaust victims escaped Moscow's so-called denazification campaign. But Margarita stayed to care for her sick husband Valery as long as she could. An explosion blew out all our windows, she says. After that shock, he grew weaker and weaker. After nearly a month of war, Valery passed away. His body still lies in a morgue. There are no funerals because of the fighting. Now age 82, the Holocaust survivor knew it was time to go, packed only what she could carry, and fled her birthplace.
It is very difficult when my beautiful town, when I lived all my life, is destroyed.
A driver picked up Margarita in this vehicle, damaged in an earlier attack. For 2 days, they traveled out of Kharkiv and across dangerous territory to Lviv.
It is a very hard road.
From there, she boarded an ambulance and was ferried into Poland. We were tracking her evacuation and met her at the border crossing. Hi, welcome to Poland. But Margarita still has further to go. She wants to join her brother in New Jersey.
I was not scared.
Where is this bravery from?
It comes alone to us.
Margarita hopes to return, bury her husband of 40 years, and see her beloved city at peace again. Salma Abdulaziz, CNN, Krakow.
Now, the Grammy Awards on Sunday featured a special guest, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In a pre-taped message, the